Alright, well, I'm going to be continuing in the book of Mark today, and I'll be starting in chapter 5. But before I continue and start with chapter 5, I want to recap what we just ended with in chapter 4. See, we had Jesus calming the storm and exercising His power. Now, the message that we got from that was the question, what manner of man is this? And the answer was clear. It was the divine God the Son, Jesus Christ. But they encountered this on the sea. Now, they had chosen to leave from the parables to cross the sea, and this great example of His power and His authority happened on the sea. But where were they going? Well, that's where we're going to start in chapter 5, verse 1. It says, "And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes." So that's where they were going. They were going to the country of the Gadarenes. Now, some other ancient manuscripts say Gerasenes, but the general message is this was an ancient town very far from where Israel was. And most importantly, this was a non-Israelite area. Now, it doesn't say that here in the first verse, but you see that in just a few verses down. But he came to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Now, when it says the tombs, I want us to get the proper visual. This wasn't tombs like we think nowadays, or even the tomb that Jesus was in. See, the tomb that Jesus was in would have been a traditional Jewish tomb. But the tomb that this man was in was a necropolis. That's why it says the tombs. It would have been a series of tombs set into a mountainside. So he would have been in the mountains, very high up, away from the rest of society. This wouldn't be a cemetery outside the town like anything else. This would be a city of tombs. And it says that he met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit. Now, another word that's often used is demon. But the word here used is unclean, so that the reader would get the connection between the spirits and several other things about where this man was. It says, they met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains. So, two things. He's living in the tombs. This is among the dead. This is a highly unclean area. And when we say unclean in this culture, I'm not referring to germs or to mess. It meant spiritually unclean. Now, certainly living among the dead wouldn't be good physically either, but that was a spiritually unclean area. When you came around a dead body, you weren't allowed in the temple for 7 days. So this was isolation from the temple. As a matter of fact, it was isolation from pretty much everyone. No one could be around you while you were unclean. And the second thing we learn is he had incredible strength. I'm going to continue. It says, because he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. So he couldn't be bound with chains, he couldn't be bound with fetters, neither could any man tame him. He was a very, very strong man, to a point that no man could tame him. This is stronger than any human naturally could be. If I was to be placed in chains, I could not simply pluck them asunder. That is incredible strength. Strength that could not be matched. And that strength is coming from these unclean spirits. But it says, and always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. Now, there's two things to take from this. And I want to just mention this. This is somewhat of a sensitive subject for many. But when it says that he is here crying and cutting himself with stones, this is an example of the type of torment he was undergoing. Now, it's possible a lot of this came from the demons themselves trying to harm him. But this is also something people do when they're undergoing great torment. This is something that people who undergo great depression, great anxiety, will often harm themselves as a means of distraction or to take away from the pain. As strange as it sounds, that was a sign of incredible distress. This man was not simply having a little demon on his shoulder, telling him to say little fibs. That is not the type of demon he was dealing with. He was not dealing with your friendly neighborhood demon who tells you to do the bad things while your angel tells you to do good things. He was undergoing great pain and suffering. And it's very possible also that the cutting with stones was the demons themselves attempting to destroy him, attempting to make his life worse. But this went on night and day. He was deprived of sleep. He could not rest. He was stuck in the tombs and crying and harming himself. But it says this, but when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him. Now, this is a very, very odd response. When you first see just that verse by itself, you might be able to gauge from it, but it's a somewhat peculiar verse. Is it the man worshiping him, or is it the demon? Because it seems that the demons are in control of him, but yet why would they be worshiping him? Well, here's why, in verse 7. It says, he ran and worshipped him and cried with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. So that's the demon speaking. The demon recognizes Jesus. The demon knows Jesus. Not just as Jesus the good man or Jesus the miracle worker, but Jesus thou Son of the Most High God. And what's his immediate request? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. The reason he worshipped is when you worship, what you're doing, especially back then, was to bow face first onto the ground. It's a thing called prostration. He was putting himself at God's mercy, begging him not to torment him. Why? Because that was Jesus. He knew who Jesus was, and he knew what God had in store for him. This is what Jesus said. For he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. Not addressing the man, but addressing the spirit within. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. This is where we learn that this was not simply one unclean spirit. This was many. A legion. Now a legion was thousands. They could range a wide range, but it was in the thousands. Thousands of demons all in this man. And a legion was a set of Roman soldiers. So with that bears also an implication that these demons were in a way soldiers. They were gathered for an attack. So there are many, and he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. Now I mentioned earlier that the country of the Gadarenes was not an Israelite area. This is how we know. We don't know too much about the country of the Gadarenes. We know a bit from archaeology and from history, but the main hint that they weren't Israelites was there was a herd of swine feeding. What would the Israelites have to do with swine? See, we as Christians will often take for granted the current state that we're in and forget that the Israelites were in a different condition, especially prior to the crucifixion of Christ. The swine absolutely were unclean. The Bible called them unclean. Now remember this, the spirit was called an unclean spirit. The tombs made the man unclean. And in here were the herd of the unclean animals, the pigs. But these demons are not as much concerned about that. They're concerned about not being cast away, not being cast out of the country. And as a matter of fact, some of the other Gospels record that they asked not to be cast into the abyss specifically. So they knew what was coming. But there's this great herd of swine feeding, and all the devils besought him, saying, "Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them." Now, why would they ask for this? Because the swine were essentially home to them. As strange as this sounds, they as unclean spirits would feel at home in the unclean, which is why they would take up home in the tombs. They took up the home in the tombs because that is where uncleanness was. And these spirits wanted to spread that and wanted to be around that. They did not want to be around God. They did not want to be around anything to do with God. They reacted with terror to Jesus' arrival. But did Jesus give them that opportunity? It says, "And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000 and were choked in the sea." Now I'm going to come back to this, but we do learn a very precise thing here, is how many demons were there? 2,000. They went into 2,000 swine. Now, why they couldn't go into just one swine, it doesn't make clear. But they went into the whole herd of the swine, and immediately they ran violently down a steep hill into the sea and drowned. It says, "And they that fed the swine fled." Well, this was a herd of 2,000. They're going to have people watching them. And they just watched all of their swine run off the mountain and drown. It says they fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. Well, these people are terrified. They're mad. They don't know what just happened. They know this man showed up. And next thing you know, the herd that they are meant to watch over just drowned. Well, some of this was likely them trying to save themselves. explaining to the people, no, this wasn't us who killed the swine. This strange man showed up and caused them all to die. It says, and they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They had no idea how this happened. This man who no man could tame was now in his right mind, sitting, clothed, fine. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed, and with the devil, and also concerning the swine. So they talked about the man who was possessed, and about the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. Now, personally, if someone came into my town and was exorcising a demon out of a man, I would find that to be a wonderful blessing, a great thing. Especially if he was undergoing such torment and was crying in mountains and in the tombs. But it doesn't seem that that was their concern. Because they weren't just talking about that, it says, and also concerning the swine. They were mad because he just killed 2,000 of their pigs. But when he was coming to the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. He wants to go with him, especially now that this town is reacting this way. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. So, he tells them to go home. And it says, and he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men marveled. All men did marvel. Now that's the verse I'm going to stop at for today. But I'm going to go back through here just a little bit to point some things out. Notice, this man lives in Decapolis. Now, Decapolis was around the Israelite region, but it wasn't Israelites. It was specifically a set of Hellenistic and Greek cities. Damascus was one of them. But Decapolis was a set of, I believe, 10 cities, hence Decapolis. And so this man went back and he was able to publish about this, to preach about this, to make sure the whole world knew. But he wasn't the only one who was preaching. As strange as it sounds, the people who fed the flock of pigs and the other people in the town also preached about this. Not as a positive thing, but they didn't just talk about him killing the swine. They talked about him casting the demons out. They couldn't help but testify to his greatness. But I'm going to mention this to draw back on when the pigs died. Is why did the pigs die? Did the demons not know how to control the pigs and decide to all run off the cliff? The demons were pretty much begging to stay in that area and to not be cast out of the country or into the abyss. Why would they do that? Oh, it doesn't actually say the demons controlled the pigs. It simply says that they were cast into the pigs. They didn't control them the way they controlled the man. And notice, the Bible never corrects the people on the fact that he had killed the pigs. This was Jesus who did it. This was Jesus that caused them to run violently down a steep place into the sea. Now this was somewhat mercy for the pigs, so they didn't have to live with demons in them. But this was also teaching this city, this Gentile area, that Christ came to purify. Now, I know I mentioned it before, but I really want to emphasize that this is a pre-crucifixion time. Pigs were unclean. God used them as a symbol of uncleanness. God taught them as unclean. So when He's casting the pigs off into the sea, He was cleansing the area. He was cleansing the area of these pigs. And this man who was living in the tombs, He told him to go home. He's keeping that man from the unclean area. And the unclean spirits that were there, they were also cast away and destroyed. It says that they were in the pigs when they were choked in the sea. Now, where they went, Mark doesn't specifically say. But they certainly weren't in that area anymore. But there's a few other things we can get from this. Is one, demons aren't always how the world portrays them. One is, as horrifying as this is to say, if you're dealing with demons, you are most likely not dealing with one. In the movies, they like to show that there's the one demon who is attacking this person. And they're going to know, and they're going to be able to hit them and strike at them and do whatever they want. It's going to be thousands. In this case, it was at least roughly 2,000 demons. A legion of demons. It was meant to be an overwhelming force. And what will they do? They will pull you into agony. Now this possession here, possession does not happen with those whom Jesus Christ is guarding their spirit. But demonic attacks can still happen to the saved. As much as I wish I could say demons won't attack the saved, they can't do what they can to the unsaved, but they can and will attack the saved. They will attack the saved far more than the unsaved. Because to the unsaved, they really want them to experience a good life. To most unsaved, they will go throughout their life never being possessed because the demon wants them to feel very happy with their life as it is. The demon doesn't want you to see yourself in need of God. The demon doesn't want you to feel in need of Jesus. Only in extreme circumstances will they do that. Demonic possession was very infrequent in the Bible. But to the Christian, they do want you to suffer. This man clearly had a heart open for Jesus. Because the moment these demons were cast out, he didn't go off and run. He didn't do what others when they were healed did and disobeyed Jesus. He obeyed His every word and was begging to go with Jesus wherever He went. And I think the demons could tell that that man's heart was receptive to Jesus. And so the demons wanted to make him suffer. They wanted to hurt him. But they didn't expect one thing. Demons are not all-knowing. They can't see the future. And they can't read your thoughts. They're not like God. They're not omniscient. They're very smart, but they can't do the things God can do. They didn't know that Jesus was going to come to this man. As a matter of fact, where does it say he lived? Decapolis. They took him from his hometown, where all of his friends were, where everyone that would have cared about him was, and took him all the way over to the country of the Gadarenes. and brought him to the least visited location in all, the tombs. And these tombs were so far away that they were actually right by the sea. Now, most people don't know this, but you don't put necropolises near the ports. This would not have been a normal section for the sea. This would have been a spot that very few people have even seen, and the only ones who would even see him would be fishermen. The demons wanted to isolate him, wanted to drive him away, and most importantly, wanted to keep him away from God's people, from the temple, from God's Word. For that reason, Jesus, who can know all things, the demons don't know, said after he was finished with the parables that he wanted to cross the sea and to get to that man. And when he arrived, they knew exactly who he was. And it says that they ran to him. Now, they didn't run from him. They knew it was over the moment he showed up. They ran to him, recognizing his power, his authority, his destructiveness, his ability to cast them into torment. And they were begging that that would not happen. Now, why were they afraid of him tormenting them? Jesus had not tormented any demons at this point. Because every demon on earth didn't show up here, poof, big surprise. They all left with a warning from God. That one day, the time would come when God would enact justice upon them. And they who had been living on this earth, tormenting this poor man, bringing him over into these unclean areas around the pigs, in the land of the Gentiles, far away from the Word of God. And now the Son of the Most High shows up. They thought it was their day. And though it doesn't say it here in Mark, it does seem that that day was that day for them. Jesus had the authority. The demons knew that. This verse right here best explains the verse, the demons believe and tremble. See, if I ask someone, do you believe Jesus is the Son of the Most High? There's billions out there who would say yes. But how many of them can only say yes in the same way the demon did? How many of them can only say yes up here? See, demons have that knowledge. They know who God is. They know who the Son of God is. They lived in the realm where the Son of God was. But they didn't trust Him. And actually, this reminds me, without going and derailing into this, but just shortly, what we talked about this morning was with Adam and Eve. See, the problem there wasn't that they didn't know what God said. Eve was able to quote what God said. Adam certainly didn't forget. He was there to hear it before Eve ever did. It wasn't that they didn't know it. It's that they didn't trust it. The moment the snake showed up and told them otherwise, made them question it, made them doubt that it was for truly just to keep them from becoming like God Himself, they stopped trusting it. See, that's why it says the demons believe and tremble. But now I want to leave us with what's the message we are to get from this. The book of John tells us that Jesus did far more deeds than are recorded in Scripture. So it makes you wonder, why did Scripture record the ones that it did? There's probably many miracles that are simply either the same as another or simply for Jesus' own purposes. Why did he record this for us to know? Well, it's because we may undergo something not the same but similar. We may someday be attacked by demons. The Bible makes it pretty clear that we will encounter them. As hard as that is to say, Paul himself had a struggle with demons. It even says at the end of Mark that we will have the ability to, in his name, cast out demons. It shows you how often we'll run into them. But when we are being attacked by demons, will we simply cry out in pain? Will we simply seek to distract from the struggles? Will we isolate ourselves from others, or will we let ourselves be isolated? I know many times when people are being oppressed by demons, being oppressed by the sin, oftentimes, they separate from society. See, demons will seek to hurt, and they will seek to infect, is the word I like to use. They want to spread their dark nature to you. And even if you're saved, they will seek to pull you back into the life that Jesus saved you from. They will seek you to commit sins. They will seek you to fall into darkness, and they can't take your salvation from you. They wish. But they know that once you're saved, your heart pulls at yourself. And you know when you're doing wrong. And you feel that pain. And so if they can pull you into sin, they can bring you into shame. And when you are full of shame, you don't want to be around anyone. See, a thief who is found out, the last thing they will want to do is go to the pastor to be told they're a sinner. Though that's the message that they need to hear, they don't want to hear that. And so that can make them go away from their pastor. And their dear friends who love them and want to tell them the truth, that shame can pull them away from them as well. The demons want to isolate. They want to harm, and they want to destroy. But Jesus came with the power and the authority to cleanse that area. This wasn't an Israelite area. Many people thought that he just came for Israel, but he did not. He came for the whole world, and here he went to the Gentiles. They didn't welcome him with open arms. I wish as a descendant of Gentiles I could say that he did, that he was welcomed with open arms. But he wasn't. And they still wanted to live in their worldly ways, and he just cast them away from those sins, from that uncleanness. But that's really the other important message. Is that Jesus opened it up for the Gentiles. Jesus set the example. Jesus made this opportunity open and healed a Gentile. He showed that God was not just God of the Israelites, but God of the Gentiles as well. And set this man free from this suffering. This man experienced this transformation. He was now in his right mind. He was now clothed. He was now able to go back to his friends. And most importantly, he became a living testimony of Jesus. One that was said not only by himself, not only through even the words of his enemies, those who found this man to be an outcast. One that they sought to bind with chains. But he was a testimony just by living. Just through his every walk, just by being set free. And I think it's important to remember that though this man was free in the material sense, chains could not hold him, neither could fetters, neither could any man hold him, he wasn't free. See, people in prison don't scream out in agony, nor do they try to harm themselves. Yet this man who couldn't be bound by physical means was in much greater suffering that he resorted to cutting himself with stones and crying out all day and night. We often think that our physical liberty is the greatest gift, but in reality, it's our spiritual liberty that Christ wants. He doesn't want us to be spiritually bound. He wants us to be set free, and that's what he did here. He showed his power over the demons. He showed his authority over them. He showed that his kingdom was not just for one nation, but for all peoples. And most importantly, he showed that he could break the bonds that really mattered. When Paul was in chains, he still praised the Lord. But yet, though this man was not in chains, due to his spiritual bondage, he was in suffering day and night. So if you have the choice between this physical bondage or this spiritual bondage, this passage shows you which one matters. So when Jesus says, "Ye who are free indeed," he says that the truth sets you free. We see who sets you free. For I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. This is what Christ can do in your life. Now I want to apply it to your life, just very briefly, is I pray that none of us deal with demons in a similar manner. But I can't peer into someone's soul and know their salvation. I don't know who's watching this at home, whether they are saved or not. But even if you're not possessed, they can still harm you. They can still guide you away. They can still try to tear you away from that joy that you had and cause you to go into this suffering, this pain, this near bondage. But there's one thing that they can't stop, is they can't stop Jesus. They can't stop Jesus from setting you free. So if you are ever experiencing this pain, like the devil is weighing you down, even if it's not a direct demon himself, but be it sin, be it that weight of sin, or that guilt and that shame of sin, Christ can set you free. I don't walk around as though I have never sinned. I know I've sinned. But the reason I am not weighed down is because I know someone took that sin, that penalty for sin, for me. He became sin who knew no sin. And for that reason, He was there that I may be regenerated, that I may become closer to Christ each and every day, that each day I struggle with sin less. I can't stand up here and lie and say I do not sin. But I can say that Christ makes that burden ever so lighter. I still stumble because that's me. That's the me that's here. But the Christ in me is what gets me back up. The Christ that lives in my heart is the one that keeps me from stumbling any time I don't. The Christ that lives within me is the one who makes it so I can rejoice in the Lord and not live in torment, not live in fear. So I want to encourage you all that whatever struggles you're going through, that you turn to Jesus. For He has the authority to cast out demons. He has the authority to destroy them. And He can go into places that never wanted to be cleaned, and He will cleanse them. He will purge them of uncleanness. He will set the captives free, that we may be a testimony of His greatness, that we may be a testimony of how great things Jesus had done for him. How great things the Lord had done for him. But we have to turn to the one who can do this. And it doesn't matter if you're the most wicked of sinners, if you are a Gentile, if you are someone who is cast out or someone who is rejected. Christ can and will save you if you turn to Him. The rest of the people there, the rest of those in Scripture, those who condemned Him, there's no blessing listed for them. No statement of that joy, that rejoicing found in them. And because they didn't have Christ, they couldn't rejoice at this news, but rather wanted Jesus as far away from them as they could be. So you have the choice. Live as the demoniac, the one who was possessed, lived. Set free from his pain and suffering and being a living example for Christ, or live away from Him. I promise you that one is a far more blessed life. But at this time, the altar is open. If there's any of you who would like to come forward for salvation, if you're unsaved, I ask that you receive Him, that He can guard you. That He can not only guard you with His presence, but He can put that armor of God upon you, that you may be protected against the legions of the devil that will seek to destroy you. And even if you're already saved, if you would like prayer for protection, prayer for this freeing from these attacks, that Christ strengthens your faith and strengthens your trust in Him, that through these times you may have joy, that you may have hope, that you may have this peace, that you want to follow Him wherever He goes. I invite you to come as we sing. And if any of you would like prayer for healing, for anything, we invite you to come.